my three favorite leagues.
We're rolling, and we're rolling early. What's good, everyone? Welcome to the 1 Foot Down podcast, a college fantasy football show on the Fantasy in Frames Network. I'm your host, Chris Battistone. With me, as always, riding shotgun is Mike Haas, and tonight we will be discussing early trends and draft strategies that we have implemented early in our draft season stretch. Let the saga begin.
Welcome, football fanatics, to the 1 Foot Down podcast on the Fantasy in Frames Network. Your gridiron guides, Chris and Mike, are geared up to lead you through the thrilling world of college fantasy football. Whether we're diving into Power 5 giants or uncovering hidden gems, brace yourselves for expert insights, analysis, and daring predictions. Stay in the game. Subscribe, rate, and review. This is your 2024 source for college fantasy football dominance. Let the fantasy frenzy begin.
We are back. We are live. And like I mentioned at the top, I'm Chris Battistone. With me is my guy, Mike Haas. Mike, we are in the thick of draft season, as crazy as it is. It is March. There is madness, but we ain't playing basketball, baby. We are in college fantasy football, best balls, a little bit of basketball. I'm not in any basketball, brother. We got the Legacy 3 going. We got the best balls going. It's been a fun off season, I guess you could say, really the on season for us. And in this episode, Mike, we're going to talk about some of our favorite trends that we've noticed early in these drafts, some of our personal and favorite strategies as we approach multiple best ball drafts. I'm excited to talk about it. But before we get into that, man, it's been a while since we've shared the airwaves. Michael, how have you been, man?
Good, having lots of fun doing those drafts. You and I were sharing notes, didn't even know if we were live, if we were, this stuff is, once you're celebrities like us, you know what I mean? It just gets, but the drafting and the best balls I'm sure have during this downtime last few weeks have been great. So lots of fun and some skilled drafters out there. That's what we were talking about. Like, skilled drafters knowing that they take in content and you can tell. So trying to do different draft strategies is quite interesting watching it unfold. Yep.
Yeah. And there's been some sharp rooms, some very sharp players, guys that, maybe we've talked about it. Oh, I thought he was going to drop a couple rounds. I had him at the bottom, a little bit lower on my list. And this guy's going 2 to 3 more rounds more than where we've got him. And what we're trying to do with this episode is just break down, where maybe we should take some of these guys that we have a little lower on our list, guys that we have seen climb up draft boards, guys that we've seen fall, how we approach high-risk players. We're going to talk about all that stuff here today on the 1 Foot Down podcast. And Mike, I'm excited to talk about this with you because, you're one of the most successful college fantasy players that I've ever played with. And for every year, you just seem to walk out of these drafts with these stout teams. And I'm sitting there holding all these zeros because I'm the schlub that's drafting way too many freshmen. And here you are just cashing checks, man. So I'm excited to hop into this episode and talk college ball with you, brother.
I can't fit my headphones over my head anymore, Chris. Like it's like I think
it's getting too big for you. Hey?
Well, you and I run into each other in a lot of the drafts trying to, because we understand each other's philosophies a little bit, but it's good to lean on others. And one thing we're talking about tonight, an interesting point that I had later on, but is how some of the other strategies rub off on you. And it's good to be open to that. So to be good and have fun at fantasy is to have that little bit of a humble pie every now and again on one that you get close, you don't win, or you see somebody do something that works. Keep those things in the back of your mind and go, you know what, this draft I see a pattern developing and I'm going to try that. So I'm tried years in this draft. That's why I bring that up. You knew I'm
wide
trying
receiver heavy, baby.
wide receiver. Like it fell to there. Do it. Don't think you got to stick to your
And the legacy leagues. I mean, we could talk about that in a different episode. That's a different beast. I mean, you don't have the NFL talent to lean on. You are trying to set your NFL team up by drafting, 2-3 years of rookie drafts, down the line, trying to hit those guys that are going to make that push into the NFL and produce for you, because the way that league's constructed, it grows every year. Your NFL starting roster grows every year. And if you don't have a competing team, you're pretty much just throwing away cash on both sides. So there's a lot of balance at play in that league, and you're going to have to come out with some good strategy on how to kind of just project some of these guys to make it to that next level. And some of those guys early on in these CFF drafts, especially, we've been able to find late in the drafts early on, and they've just been rising stars since then. It's only been a month, 2 months since some of these guys, or since we've been drafting. So Mike, as we head into the trend section of this episode here, who are some rising stars for you that you've seen, and who are some players that you've seen, just climb up draft boards?
Well, it's interesting what we talked about in prep a little bit throughout the week. I won't talk at length about this player, but I just have to bring him up. I will. We've seen Agent Bond here rising up the draft boards, where early on in nowhere, and you could get him in round 10, Isaiah Bond.
Yeah.
Week by week, he's been on the rise. So you can see how media and reports and different things, like he was but he was way down the radar. Now you're seeing things come out where, in my opinion, they're probably boosting up a higher than we would ever thought when we first goes. I think that's a bit too high. Like that's where you need to bring in your own analysis sometimes and your own wisdom, and realize that might be a little steep when we've seen the pairings. But it's interesting. He was going now up in round 3 at times. Yeah. And round 2, and we saw just in this draft. That's enough about Isaiah Bond.
Bond, but just even with Bond though, like he's a little bit of a I wouldn't say a scary prospect, because I believe in the talent that he has to be able to get to that next level. But myself, Drew, and Rhett, we were breaking down the Texas offense today in a group chat, just going over, Xavier Worthy and some of the alarming statistics that are in his profile. The contested catch rate to some might be alarming, the low A dot, but a lot of that stems from the guy who's just playing quarterback. And we were breaking down some of Quinn Ewers' games there, and he's just not a guy that pushes the ball downfield. So for Isaiah Bond to get that relevancy as a CFF asset, like you said, him going too high is going to be detrimental to his value there. So I agree with that Isaiah Bond stuff.
And with Ewers is what came to mind. He needs that consistency. I think we talked about there. He's got to hit the consistency and hit all the throws. At times he's hot for a drive, and then
I just want him to push that ball downfield. I think his A dot for the 2 seasons that he started sits below 10. He sits below 9. I think its average is about 8.2. He's got a game where he threw the ball nearly 30 times, and his average depth of target per attempt was 3.6 yards. So that kind of stuff, as a college fantasy player, that kind of stuff is alarming when you're picking especially a wide receiver early in your draft. So as much as we love Isaiah Bond, a C2C asset, he has been rising. You're right.
So and now I think, with too high, like we were picking him. Just the one player, so we can move on over to your players. One player I thought of, one of your favorite in the drafts, was Caden Fegan, the running back for Illinois, who early on in the best ball. So we'll just clarify some of the best ball drafts, which are different than the C2C for rankings. The first few we did, they get forgotten, and the next thing you know, guys realize, an opportunity will be there. So in Illinois, there's opportunities for carries, and you see the potential. So I scratched down Fegan and Dylan Sampson for Tennessee. Also somebody else, just opportunity running backs that should lead the backfield at least now in the spring. We'll see where summer takes that or the next portal. But right now, those are some pretty stud backs, in my opinion. Samson, Fegan, and LaQuint Allen.
Yeah,
so I see them all going.
LaQuint Allen's a stud, man. I remember
Because
that
of
there was that one
opportunity.
draft. Yeah, that one draft I was able to get Fegan. I think it was like in the late 20s, and everyone just missed them. And then of course I let them all hear it in the group chat. You got to do that when you get value like that. But
Yep.
you know, great options there, like you mentioned, Caden Fegan and Isaiah Bond, wide receiver for Texas, transferring from Alabama. And for me, a guy that I have found just flying up draft boards, another wide receiver transfer from Alabama, and that's Malik Benson now with FSU. The glowing reports out of spring practices so far about his connection with DJ. I don't want to mess up his last. We'll just call him
DJU.
But it's been glowing. He's been the standout wide receiver for FSU over there, at least in early reports. And if you go and break down all the drafts that I've been a part of so far, Best Ball 6, he was drafted in the 26th. And then every draft after that I've been in, he's moved up a couple rounds. Now in Best Ball 15, he's being drafted in the 18th round. So that's almost a 10 round, almost a 100 player rise that Malik Benson has seen. And it's only going to increase as the reports come in from spring and as the connection with DJU grows, because they lost Keon Coleman. They lost Johnny Wilson. Jaheim Bell is now gone from FSU. They got competency at the quarterback position, not, elite tier quarterback one in DJU, but a guy who's going to be able to get Malik Benson the ball. So for me, Malik Benson, the guy is I've seen at least just shoot up draft boards, and what just warranted. He's a talented guy, and he has every opportunity to be that wide receiver one for FSU. But instead of guys rising up draft boards, who are some early round hidden gems that you've been able to draft in the thick of the draft, in that middle of your best ball draft? So we got a quick comment here from Gator J. Samson stole touches last year, which is right. The Tennessee backfield was in flux, and as a guy who likes to hope in one hand and defecate in the other, I'm hoping for Cameron Seldon this year. I mean, my hands are full of hope, and I just don't think that's going to hit, man.
Yeah, now that a little comic relief there. Like, how many shares? This would be the trivia question for this show. How many shares does Chris Badenstall have of Cam Seldon? But I've drafted him. What you just said, I've now put him lower, and it leads to another strategy that we're talking about here. If you draft Sampson, get Seldon. And get him. Maybe don't wait as long. I know I'm giving away trade secrets. Don't wait as long to get him. And they have him listed as wide receiver and running back, using him in a comp. Now, whether that's good or not, could be. You could make an argument for either
those wide receiver, tight end cheat codes are.
And now running back wide. But in college, we talked about this in one of our first shows. Was there's usually enough to go around. Like, look at how many backfields. You just let it play out.
Sure.
More on the strategy of the offense. If they're on the field a lot, like long drives or whatnot, it'll support it. But if there's offenses that aren't running long drives and they're 3 and out and inconsistent, and that brings us back. We won't be that hard on Quinn Ewers in Texas, but they need more consistency down and not off the field to get the numbers of all the quality players on the offensive side of the ball. But I like Seldon too, and I like Seldon.
Yeah, and so let's pivot to where we see you finding the hidden gems in the early rounds. Enough about the Tennessee Volunteers. I'm tired of talking Tennessee Volunteers, especially running backs.
Yeah. Well, we usually talk about Notre Dame. So then people in the best ball drafts, I laughed. And only today, when I was going through the notes, I'm thinking, Jeremiah Love keeps sneaking up there, and then people drafting in pairs again. I scratched down drafting Love and Price, or drafting when you have deep rosters like this in the best ball. It's a pretty good little strategy to do. What we're finding out, lots of teams, lots of pairs, get them both deep run. Nothing can hurt. Either they both do well, or one guy's hurt for a few games, and then another guy comes in and spells him and takes off. So the only danger to it is if that lead back just goes bonkers, like he's lighting it up, and then they'll sit that guy down. So you're kind of hoping everybody does well and and does well. At times you'd think that's not what you want in fantasy, but in college they're using 3-4. There's teams using
it's
3
consistent.
And 4
Yeah, they're consistently running a committee, and ultimately you want someone around you that talks about you behind your back the way Mike talks about Notre Dame, because it's always glowing when Mike is talking about his Fighting Irish. I think he has the clover emoji on just like he's got the hotkeys ready to go. He's ready to go. So you give Mike a minute to talk about Notre Dame, and he'll take an hour. I love it. My sleeper, I guess not really a sleeper, but hidden gem in the early rounds, Rock Taylor, wide receiver in Memphis, being drafted around that wide receiver 25 spot. So a back end wide receiver to a player that's going to see 100 or more targets. He saw 100 just last year. In that system, Cramsey had them rolling as a top 10 passing offense. So the capabilities for Rock Taylor to produce will be there. If he can get an increase in touchdowns, he can definitely finish as a back-end, high-end, back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. He only had the 4 touchdowns last year. If we can get that number up to possible 6, 7, maybe even 8, we can see great things for Rock Taylor. And where you're drafting them, 6th, 7th, 8th round as that wide receiver 25, like I said, you're gonna be laughing. So Rock Taylor, for a guy, for me, wide receiver from Memphis, is a guy that I have no problems reaching for. I got no problems reaching for a player like Rock Taylor. And just go ahead, Mike.
So there's 2 I would mention, just because I can't keep talking about Notre Dame, but the 2
you
I would
can.
mention would be Nick Anderson for Oklahoma, who interestingly, when you research him, so I drafted him today, but tall, big, I think 6'2", 6'3", well over 200, runs really well, and was longest yards per catch. I can't remember whether in the Big 10 or Big 12 or whatever they're in, right? Then you read further, almost in the country was his yards per catch, right up at the top. So that's interesting with Arnold or whatever there with him. And another player you and I really liked that I had thought about was Malachi Fields. Now his targets will open up.
Washington's
teammates
gone.
leaving too. So and hit a baller, so you recognize a few of them that that are ballers and willing to be a target hog. So just because I mentioned, but those are a couple players I like, maybe personally, but you know what? It's okay drafting some of the guys you like personally and watch and keep it fun, when you do the fantasy. Then when you hit right, more fun.
Yeah, it always is, and when you hit right on those, high risk players, maybe players coming off injuries, players transferring up in competition, that is the ultimate, goosebump feeling. That's the feeling. That's like hitting that good shot in golf. It's always that one player that's going to make you come back every year and be like, hey man, I drafted Jonathan Brooks in round 36 of a C2C league, and now he's projected to be RB1, or I drafted Puka Nacua in the 16th round of a deep Devy league, and now, he's possibly a top 10 dynasty wide receiver for most. So hitting those late guys, hitting those high risk, high reward guys is always a great feeling in C2C, especially in CFF. But Mike, give me one high risk guy that you have no problem taking in your draft so far.
Oh my gosh, a high risk guy.
And there's been a few because you got Chris Mitchell. We can talk Notre Dame.
You're right.
Chris Mitchell
risky.
in Notre Dame. He's moving up in competition, right? Coming from FIU there, going up to Notre Dame. He's going to have Riley Leonard as his quarterback. So that's, I guess, could be considered a high risk guy. You're not necessarily spending high capital on Chris Mitchell as of right now, but a guy that in a situation that very well could end up being, a top end college fantasy producer.
Yeah. So there's one I knew if you filled in a little airtime, Chris, this name would pop in my head. I've drafted him everywhere. He's one of the highest, like really low rated, but as you read upon him and where he can go and his talent level, and he transferred from Miami, went to Georgia, is Kobe Young.
Oh,
Kobe Young. Yeah. I don't know what it is on that guy, but now I've been reading like he is projected much, much higher, and he kind of has got lost over these drafts. Now I know he'll have a good QB. They only have Lovett, but I think if you take a flyer, and I don't even know if he registers as a flyer, but that's the category he's looking at right now. When we do all these drafts, it looks like people think he's a flyer. I got him in the 30th round. 30th round. My 11th receiver. I was like, take that. He was good at Miami with Tyler Van Dyke. So, I mean, if, again, your QB, but back, I think he'll target. They're going to bring him in on that outside, big receiver, down the line. Don't just go. And then let Lovett come over and do some of the fancier routes in the middle and the tough work. Lovett's good at that. So, interesting. But that's one player, as you were talking, that fits your question, sir.
And then, furthermore, if we want to break down high risk players, and speaking of Georgia, what are your thoughts on Trevor Etienne?
It's a sad day right now with his stuff going on.
Yeah, he did get arrested. He got arrested.
He's one of my favorite.
He got arrested, right?
Yeah. Now he was a player touted. Like you could see him this year if he lives up to his capabilities. Let's not go too high, but say top 10, like automatic. But he has the talent and the capability. As sky's the limit. And I was drafting him. He probably was not going in the top 5 to 6 rounds in most of all of these drafts. But now, and he has slipped up to the higher, not slipped up. He's risen up. So it's interesting because I find him so multi-dimensional, obviously pedigree, the whole deal. So I hope things work out there because I have a lot of shares in him. So.
It was misdemeanors. It was a non-alcohol DUI. And to quote the great Stephen A., stay off the weed.
But we're not all Snoop Dogg. Like, come on.
That's it, right? But there's other guys, there's Panay Boone who's moving up to Louisville. Another guy, high risk, but could be high reward if the production comes through. And just looking at this draft here, you got LeJontay Western, Colorado, tied to Shadur Sanders in that offense. Another guy, high risk, possible high reward. Miller Moss, if he gets the starting job in USC, tied to those wide receivers in that offense. Another guy that could be high risk and high reward. So there's few guys that, when you're drafting, you're going to want to fit into your profile. A few of these high profile guys. And Mike, when you are drafting, you're going to want to kind of, find the right balance, especially in best ball when you can't go to waivers or you can't make trades. So what's your approach to finding the balance in best ball? Are you drafting more depth or are you trying to attack upside?
Yeah, both. So I put it is in the different from different in best ball, different in C to C. So we'll just tackle best ball.
Yeah, let's talk about college fantasy. We can leave C2C for another shot here, but let's
So when you're doing that, if I see certain runs happening where certain managers, it's crazy, they'll go 3 or 4 running backs for 3-4 rounds straight, or 3 or 4 wide receivers 3-4 rounds straight. So that's what gets stressful on you. But being I have type A personality, I have to scratch out lists, and sometimes fall in line with it so that you don't miss out, because you'll find if you just stick to your same old pattern, you may not get a little breadth of success, as you were saying, in other leagues. You change it up, match what somebody's doing. That's fine. You don't want them just to take all of the top players, or the punches, or the, as you were saying, a flyer, but good quality players flyer, because you're drafting with everyone else that's also enthusiastic and knows quite a bit about college football. So you better get in there. So I figured sometimes follow the pattern and sometimes mix it all up and be the one to change the pattern. But that doesn't always, easier said than done, depending the group you're drafting with, to change it up. But I've learned to fall in line sometimes so that I don't miss, or you'll miss them. Somebody will get them before you because they have the same idea like at hand. So
yeah,
but
and for me, like I've been guilty drafting, trying to secure those multiple touches per game in my first 3 rounds, taking 3 high volume running backs, securing, hundreds of touches, thousands of yards, double digit touchdowns in the 30s. If I can secure that, if that value is going to drop to me, I'm going to kick aside balance and try to attack maybe balance a little bit later in my drafts. Because for me, the way I approach the best ball drafts, a great strategy when I was listening to CFF guys there is come out with, 4 QBs, 10 running backs, 10 wide receivers, and 4 tight ends. And that gives you a great base of variety of guys that can produce for you in a week in and week out basis. Because in college football as well, there's teams that are going to have 2 bye weeks. We saw it last year with USC and Caleb Williams having the second bye week, and it was in the championship weekend. So you didn't get any of that USC production from any of those guys across the board. So when I'm drafting, I attack different strategies, especially if I'm going in multiple best balls. I have found that approaching a more balanced attack at drafting these teams, I've walked out looking at my teams feeling like, okay, like I really like where I sit. I got a couple high-end QBs. I got a few high-end wide receivers. My running back room is stout. I maybe don't have the high volume guys that I want, the good 4 chunk of high volume guys, but I got guys that are going to produce fantasy points for me. So finding the right balance is always going to be tricky because the board is always going to fluctuate, just different draft in, draft out. But if you walk in with the strategy that you want to attack with these drafts and just stick to that, you're never going to leave a draft not liking what you got, especially in college fantasy, because like Mike said, there's so much variables, there's so many teams, there's so many players. You're going to walk out with some great production guys. And speaking of running backs and wide receivers and quarterbacks for you, Mike, where do you like to focus early in your drafts, and where do you think a new college fantasy player should focus early in theirs?
Yeah, I think focus always, like if you look at, we're inundated with all of these rankings and things. So how I approach it, I think I said on our very first show, look at a few of the rankings and come up with your own, scratch your own down. I go old school. I may look at them, see how they, the comparison first, and then, make your own personal scout too, like you do, Chris. You do your own scout on things. So then take a few of the rankings. Don't just take the first one you see. Look at a few, take your own scout approach, use a little bit of your football gut in there. But in the early rounds, I don't use the football gut quite as much at that point. We're going to talk about that navigating in the mid rounds. So at the top, I try to I've made my list. Maybe I had a guy go up, a guy go down, slot somewhere. If you disagree, you can disagree. Any of us, we're all in this, and you can totally disagree with some of the rankings and go with what you find on that. But try to hit your first few rounds with the players you would most like to see on your team, of the consistent producers, as you said earlier, on those numbers. Get them in those first few rounds, so then you're not as panicked as you're moving through the draft. I think you and I agree on that, and try to draft based on that. And then the round you shift, that can be the variable. Just to tie up a loose end from our previous point, if you see that run, it may change your strategy from that. You can stick with that strategy if everything stays on the up and up and on the status quo. You can carry that a long way on your own rankings, but once you see it change up and guys are hitting 3-4 wide receiver running backs down to the end of the board, if you're picking and they're going, you better change it up or you're going to be shortchanged in the end. There won't be enough of those quality guys coming back. So, but yeah, definitely early on.
Yeah, and I agree. And draft position plays a lot into how you're going to attack and team build. If you got one of the first three picks or first two picks, you're most likely taking, and we've seen it, Ashton Janty and Ollie Gordon. I have seen situations where Luther Burden has jumped up to be that first overall pick, but it's few and far between. And then after that, you got that chunk of wide receivers. You got Luther Burden, Tet McMillan, and Jalen Royals, a guy who's gonna produce fantasy points for college fantasy. And Torrey Horton. A lot of guys like myself, we like Evan Stewart in that situation there. So then you got that chunk, and then you got the QBs, Caden Salter, Byron Brown. I've really been the only two guys. You see Dylan Gabriel go in the back end of the first. So really, depending where your draft slot is going to determine where the value is going to be once it's your turn to draft. So first two picks, you're rocking with you can pick the bell of the ball, whoever you want, but the production says you're going with Ashton Janty or you're going with Ollie Gordon.
Ollie Gordon, I agree.
Just based on how those guys produce fantasy points. And then you're pivoting to, maybe one or two of the wide receivers, or you're picking a quarterback, and then that's going to determine how you're going to be set up with your next few picks. If you're picking a quarterback early in that first round, if you end up with a Salter or a Brown, you may not want another quarterback for the next 10 rounds because of how deep it is. You're going to find guys that are going to fall to that spot in your drafts that you will be able to pick up, and they'll be solid producers for you. Right. If I just look at the last draft we did, the best ball 15, and we take a look at some of the quarterbacks that dropped into those mid to late rounds, you're going to find guys that are producers.
Great quarterback.
Connor Wiegman in the 13th, Miller Moss in the 11th, Riley Leonard in the 12th, Noah Fafita in the 12th, Newsmeyer's there, Drones in the 9th. So if you do end up taking Salter or Byron Brown in the first or second round, you can completely fade that position up until the 9th, 10th, and just stock up on high-producing positional players. So I always found that to be a pretty good strategy early on in the draft, but it's going to be board and draft positions going to dictate what I'm going to do early on. And you mentioned there, and we both just talked about it, what is your strategy when you approach the mid to late rounds? So you're in the mid-teens, you're heading into the 20s. What is your approach when you start entering that landscape of your drafts, Mike?
All of my secrets are being given away. All of my
secrets. We're not really live. This is not really recorded. I'm just writing everything down. This is part of my big con to get you here, Mike.
What I like to do there, and my suggestion is, because we all know we're a fan of one or two teams or many teams or certain positions or certain areas of the country or however you want to go about it. But during those middle rounds, like I said, you better grab a few guys that you, produce because you want to win in fantasy, but others also will think of those same players, or some of the more popular programs are going to be thinking about those players. And then that's the time to attack if you have a hunch in the middle or have something that you really want that player on your team. You better take a crack at it, because I've learned through the experience that's when other guys are trying to also, they feel that's a safe spot to do it. If they've established enough of their core, then that's where they'll take, a little more high risk, and you see the fluctuation of their draft spot. So that's where I pick all my Notre Dame guys in the middle there before before everyone else scoops them up as well. But I can think of a few players that should be in there now. Sorry to answer, carry on here, Chris, but the Penn State receivers and Fleming, and that's another little group
Lambert
with Drew
Smith,
Allar that's underrated, and people don't know what to do. They figure tough schedule, sometimes weather, sometimes grind it out running backs, but his numbers are good, his receivers are good, and they're kind of sneaky. So that's one team with their receivers that. How good will Fleming do there? Lambert Smith did well, could have done better. So really interesting team and a talented team and good tight ends and good running backs. Like they'll be an interesting one to watch. How high they can ascend.
Yeah. And there's for me in the 20s, like late teens, that's where I like to start taking shots, man. Like, give me the guys that I like. Give me my guys. Give me my Brandon Sorsby. Give me my Dawson Pendergrass. I'm gonna go try to find guys that I think are gonna be producers coming into the season. Maybe guys that didn't produce last year, and guys maybe low on, or guys entering new situations, guys on teams that maybe had a bunch of transfer outs, and they're the new guy. We've been able to get Barry and Brown, Dane Key, the whole Kentucky offense. We've been able to get late. Chip Trainium, all these guys we've been able to get late, Mike.
Look at you, got me Barry and Brown. And I got him in the 26th round.
Yeah, and again, like he's just a guy that didn't overly produce last season. 42 receptions, 636 yards. He did get the 6 touchdowns, so that's a plus. They're looking for him, in those moments. But again, he's gone from Will Levis, then he's gone to Devin Leary. Now he's getting Brock Vandegrift. So a lot of his success is going to be tied to the quarterback position. And Brock Vandegrift, he couldn't beat out Stetson Bennett, couldn't beat out Carson Beck, but he's not a bum, man. He went there. I've seen some of the practice highlights. The guy looks like he's looking all right, but in these mid to late rounds, take your shots, get your guys. Your team should already be stocked up of studs, just workhorse players. Go out and get the guys that you think are going to produce. Like a Devin McHugh at UTSA, a program that loses guys. It's just across the board. Lewis Bond in BC over there with Bill O'Brien. Just a guy that could end up being a very good fantasy production wide receiver, and a guy that you're getting late in your draft. So those mid to late rounds, you can find some great assets. You can find some league winners, but it could also burn you, man. You could be stuck at some of those best balls, and it could be week 8 and half your team's taking zeros because you took too many shots. So you don't want to take too many shots. You do want to get some safe floor guys. But mid to late, go up and get your guy. And we only got a few minutes here left, Mike. So let's get to the last part of the show. We appreciate each and every person who's tuned in. If you want to ask a question for me and Mike here, hop over to YouTube or Twitter, drop a question in the chat. We will answer it live on air. Mike, give the listeners, give the viewers some of your personal tips for draft success. What are some of the Mike Haas draft commandments?
Yeah, so not to repeat, we've talked about
thou shalt draft Notre Dame players.
No. But you and I talked about staying flexible, staying adaptable.
You have to stay in water.
Pay attention. So sometimes you're distracted with other things, as we do, where you have a job, you have things happening.
Our pets' heads are falling off.
Lives.
No jobs unless you want to work 40 hours a week.
But try to, sometimes I'll even forget, you're anxious for your pick. You want to go in, you want to make your pick, but look at the draft board. So that's the biggest thing. Stay flexible, adaptable, and look at the draft board and scan it, right to left, this, that. You're on your phone, right? Just take a quick glance to see a few of the patterns. And that's a tip, here I'm giving away big trade secrets, but I'm sure many people do that.
That's why you're here, Mike. That's what you got to do at your job now, Mike. Give away the secrets.
Quite often, yeah. So view that whole board. Look at the colors. They're there for a reason. And when you see heavy on one spot and you've made your list, tweak your list, pick something else, go in that grain so you don't miss out, because that's when the numbers and the fluctuations will change. If you're sticking to your script when a whole bunch of red running backs have gone down at the one side, so just try to, that's the balanced approach that you always see me typically take. But now I've learned to adapt. There's only so many players, 12 guys in the league, and you can switch it up. So everybody can't do the same thing, or we don't it wouldn't work. So that's why each draft is its own beast and takes on its own thing. But I've learned to look at that full board to actually see and check your guys as to who was on your list and adapt it and be flexible with that list. And you can copycat's a word. You can say, copycat a few times when guys are doing that. You copy and pick them, or you'll miss the boat on
agreed.
The next guy on the list.
Yeah. And just know your draft mates, man. Watch the board. We were talking about it earlier. We're in a draft. Drafted with Ethan Sowers quite a bit. @Sow on Twitter. Great follow.
Gotta be ready.
If you play any college fantasy, the guy knows his stuff. He just knows his stuff. And when I seen him draft Caden Salter, I knew it was early. And I was just like, man, I cannot not draft Byron Brown because I don't want to give him Caden Salter and Byron Brown. I thought it was a little too early to draft Byron Brown in a C2C league, but I just did not want to give him that. I had to play some kind of defense. And you got to do that in your draft sometimes because giving a guy like Ethan, Caden Salter, and Byron Brown that he's now attached to RJ Harvey, it's not going to work out well for us, man. So I had to play. I played defense for the boys, for the league, for the rest of you guys, and I also got Byron Brown. So I'm not mad. I'm a big Byron Brown guy, but just and have fun with it, man. Like know your league mates,
right?
Yep.
The offense, defense, what you said is the exact scenario which we know can happen.
You got it. Yeah,
you have to, and you may not always predict right of that next guy picking it, but once you learn those league mates, more often than not, that's when we'll say we're sniping all the time. Well, it happens a lot. Like
we've drafted so many times together, man. How many times have I just messaged you? You messaged me. You son of a, what are you doing?
You got to pick him.
You just drafted Restrepo. He was at the top of my board. I was 2 picks away, and you got me. So it's back and forth, brother.
That's our biggest tip. Don't second guess yourself because the fun you're bringing into this and
follow your nose, baby.
Follow your nose and don't get, because someone else, as I said before, has the same little intricate list there, and they'll get them, and then you'll be like, they will. So take them. That's the fun part.
Agreed. Chase the production. Follow Fantasy in Frames, and we will try to help you find these gems for your college fantasy football season. Mike, another fun one in the books. Another great episode talking college ball, man. I could talk about college ball with you for a long time, brother. Like I said, one of the most successful fantasy players in the game, Mike Haas. Give him his flowers. I'm going to give him his flowers because all he does is win. But brother, let the people know where they can find you. Let them know what you got going on inside of fantasy football, outside of fantasy football, and give them your address so they can send you some more cool helmets.
Send me some more cool helmets. So I'll have to. So now you gave me homework, Chris. So I will update. Is it funny being? Hey, I'm the old guy, right? I may not look overly old, but I will update my Twitter account with a bunch of nice little hashtags as where to.
Oh, look at you! I'm surprised you don't call them pound signs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're lucky I can even have the right lingo for all of those things. But when I'm FF Mike H with Chris at Fantasy and Frame, but you'll find me I am doing a little bit more, and I'm going to find myself writing and trying to do some article writing and get my feet wet into that, and doing maybe jumping on as a guest, here and there on some shows here, just to support if there's the panel, and do that to mix it up. I love the college, but we'll see. We'll just do a little bit as again, past my bedtime, right? So you can't stay up too late like you guys. Chris has 4 more shows.
You missed bingo. I'm sorry, Mike. You missed bingo and aquatic aerobics. I'm sorry. I apologize. I signed you up for tomorrow's noon session right before your nap. All right.
Perfect. No,
I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you. For Mike, which you can find at FFMikeH on Twitter. For myself, Chris Battistel, and for everyone at Fantasy in Frames, we bid you adieu.